A single missile tears through the pitch-black night sky over the Strait of Hormuz, its exhaust plume painting a brilliant, terrifying streak of orange against the darkness. 3 seconds later, 17 more follow in rapid succession. On the bridge of the USS Carney, the Aegis radar screens don't just register a contact, they go entirely white with threat warnings. The klaxons scream, "This is not a drill, this is not a tabletop exercise in the Pentagon, this just happened." And what came next wasn't a measured, proportional response carefully debated by diplomats. It was a kinetic demonstration of absolute maritime dominance, because when you attempt to close the world's most critical economic jugular vein, you do not get a stern warning at the United Nations. You get deleted. Here is the minute-by-minute breakdown of what the United States military just did, how they executed it flawlessly, and why this terrifying exchange might have just triggered the most dangerous geopolitical escalation since the 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. To understand the gravity of this moment, you have to understand the geography of the battlefield. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a waterway, it is the central nervous system of the modern global economy. At its narrowest point, squeezed between the rugged coastline of Iran to the north and the Musandam Peninsula of Oman to the south, it is a mere 21 miles wide. 21 miles. In the vast expanse of the world's oceans, that is a microscopic bottleneck. And through that impossibly thin, heavily monitored corridor flows roughly 21 million barrels of oil every single day. That is 1/5 of the entire world's petroleum supply, squeezing through a gap you could practically swim across if you had the stamina and a favorable current. The economies of Japan, South Korea, India, China, and countless European nations depend entirely on the uninterrupted flow of this single stretch of water. If you close the Strait of Hormuz for a week, the global economy does not merely stumble, it completely collapses. Fuel prices do not just spike, they detonate, sending shockwaves through every financial market on Earth. Global supply chains do not just slow down, they freeze in their tracks. Groceries stop moving, factories power down, power grids fail. Every major power on Earth knows this cold, hard mathematical reality, which is exactly why the Islamic Republic of Iran has been using the threat of closing the strait as their ultimate geopolitical trump card for decades. But here is the inherent danger of geopolitical brinkmanship. Threatening to close the strait is one thing, but actually crossing the threshold and trying it is a completely different reality. And just 3 days ago, under the cover of darkness, they crossed that invisible red line. The escalation started quietly with a massive piece of floating steel. It was a Panamanian-flagged supertanker heavy with thousands of tons of crude oil making its way out of the Persian Gulf. It was on a standard route, maintaining a standard schedule, doing the exact same run that hundreds of ships do every month. It was completely unremarkable right up until the moment it wasn't. At exactly 0300 hours local time, the ship's automatic identification system, its AIS transponder, goes completely dark. The AIS is the digital heartbeat of a ship, the system that constantly broadcasts a vessel's identity, heading, and speed to every other ship and maritime authority in the world. When an AIS shuts off in the Persian Gulf, it only means one of two things: a catastrophic electrical failure, or someone has boarded the ship and doesn't want the world to watch what happens next. 30 agonizing minutes later, the reality of the situation is confirmed. The tanker has been boarded. These aren't Somali pirates looking for a quick ransom. These are highly trained naval commandos of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. They emerge from the shadows of the radar clutter in heavily armed fast attack craft. These vessels, often modified Bagamars or modern indigenous designs, are barely bigger than a luxury yacht, but they are terrifyingly fast, capable of hitting speeds upwards of 40 knots. More importantly, they are heavily armed, carrying heavy machine guns, torpedoes, and short-range anti-ship missiles. They operate using swarm tactics, surrounding the massive, lumbering tanker like a pack of wolves isolating a wounded animal. Heavily armed IRGC commandos secure the deck, breach the bridge, and immediately redirect the massive vessel northward, directly toward Iranian territorial waters. The civilian crew of the tanker doesn't resist. They are unarmed mariners, not soldiers. They can't fight back. This is a brazen state-sponsored maritime seizure, plain and simple, and the terrifying truth is, this is not the first time this has happened. Iran has played this dangerous game for years. Tanker seizures, aggressive drone harassment of foreign warships, the covert placement of limpet mines on the hulls of commercial vessels, all of it is a calculated slow burn strategy designed to constantly remind the Western world that Iran holds the keys to the choke point. But this time, their calculations were catastrophically flawed, because this time they failed to account for the silent guardian lurking just beyond the horizon. A United States Navy destroyer was operating on a routine patrol just 12 nautical miles away. The USS Carney, a Flight 1 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, is one of the most lethal surface combatants ever built by human hands. Its radar operators pick up the anomalous movements of the fast attack craft and the sudden course alteration of the tanker in real time. The captain of the Carney understands the stakes immediately. He doesn't wait to draft a lengthy request for permission from United States Central Command in Tampa. His standing rules of engagement give him the authority to protect international shipping. He orders the ship to flank speed, closing the distance rapidly. Within 40 tense minutes, the steel gray hull of the Carney is within visual range of the Iranian swarm. The Carney's communications officers immediately broadcast on standard maritime distress frequencies. The radio warnings are firm, crystal clear, and completely devoid of diplomatic fluff. The message is simple: release the civilian vessel immediately, withdraw your forces, or we will classify you as a hostile threat and engage. The silence on the radio is deafening. The Iranians do not release the vessel. Instead, they choose the absolute worst possible option. They escalate. Out of the coastal haze, 2 more IRGC fast attack craft appear on the Carney sensors. Then 4. Then 8. They are attempting to box the American destroyer in. And then the ultimate nightmare scenario unfolds. The Carney's S-Spy-1 radar system, the massive octagonal plates mounted on the ship's superstructure, detects a massive thermal bloom from the Iranian coastline. Missiles are inbound. 18 of them. These aren't small shoulder-fired rockets. These are heavy anti-ship cruise missiles launched from concealed mobile coastal defense batteries nestled in the Iranian mountains. The Carney's Aegis combat system, the highly classified multi-billion-dollar electronic brain of the ship, identifies the threat profiles instantaneously. They are Chinese-designed, Iranian-manufactured C-802S variants. They are subsonic, meaning they fly just below the speed of sound, but they are sea skimmers. They drop down to fly mere feet above the cresting waves, using the curvature of the Earth and the chaos of the ocean surface to hide from radar until the absolute last possible second. But Aegis sees everything. Time to impact, exactly 90 seconds. Here is what the general public rarely understands about an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. It is not merely a ship with guns on it, it is an integrated floating weapons grid. Below the deck of the Carney sits 96 vertical launch system, or VLS, cells. These armored silos are loaded with a lethal classified mix of Standard Missile 2s, advanced SM-6s, and Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles. At the stern and the bow sit the Phalanx close-in weapon systems, the absolute last line of defense. The ship is also wrapped in advanced electronic warfare suites designed to blind, confuse, and fry the guidance seekers of incoming threats. When 18 missiles are flying at your face, human reaction time is functionally useless. A human crew would panic, freeze, or miscalculate. The Aegis system does not panic, it calculates geometry, speed, vector, and intercept probability in milliseconds. Aegis automatically assigns intercept solutions to the highest priority threats. The launch sequence begins. The first SM-2 interceptor erupts from the forward VLS deck just 3 seconds after the initial radar detection, riding a pillar of blinding white fire into the night sky. The second missile follows half a second later, then a third, a fourth. The deck of the Carney shudders violently with each launch, the roar of the rocket motors deafening the crew inside the Combat Information Center. In under 10 seconds, the Carney unleashes a staggering 22 interceptor missiles. The dark sky over the Strait of Hormuz instantly transforms into a terrifying, brilliantly lit war zone. It looks like a localized meteor shower. High above the water, massive explosions blossom in sequence as the American interceptors meet the Iranian cruise missiles head-on. The kinetic energy of the collisions shreds the incoming threats into harmless, burning shrapnel that rains down into the black water. 17 of the 18 Iranian missiles are detected, tracked, engaged, and utterly obliterated before they even reach the halfway point between the coast and the ship. But warfare is never perfect. The 18th missile slips through the primary defensive umbrella. It drops even lower, hugging the waves, its active radar seeker locking onto the massive steel bulk of the Carney. It closes to 5 miles, then 3 miles, then 1 mile. The bridge crew braces for impact, but the Carney is not out of options. The Phalanx close-in weapon system, affectionately known as R2-D2 by the Navy crews, automatically tracks the leaker. It is a massive radar-guided 6-barrel rotary cannon. As the missile enters its kill zone, the Phalanx engages. It doesn't sound like a traditional gun. It fires 4,500 rounds of heavy, armor-piercing ammunition per minute. It sounds like a demonic buzzsaw tearing through corrugated sheet metal. A solid wall of tungsten and depleted uranium fills the air. The 18th missile flies directly into the stream of fire and violently disintegrates less than 1,000 meters from the hull of the Carney. Total engagement time from detection to the destruction of the final threat, 74 seconds, 0 hits on the American destroyer. 0 casualties, 0 damage. The crew takes a collective breath, but the silence that follows is not a retreat, it is a pivot. Because the United States Navy had just successfully defended itself, and now it was time to respond. This massive barrage was not just an isolated attack on a single destroyer, it was a brazen, undeniable attack on the foundational global principle of freedom of navigation. And the Pentagon does not improvise in these moments. Deep inside the vaults of Central Command, a pre-authorized, heavily vetted contingency response plan had been waiting for exactly this scenario. It is a classified operational blueprint we will call Operation Crossroads Protocol. And the moment that 18th missile splashed into the ocean, the protocol went fully live. Within 6 minutes of the final Phalanx burst, the Carney goes on the offensive. It does not retaliate with defensive interceptors. It reaches deeper into its VLS cells and arms the ultimate long-range hammer of the United States Navy, the Tomahawk cruise missile. 12 of them are spun up, their internal gyros aligned, their target packages downloaded directly from the Aegis system's memory. They launch in rapid, thundering succession from the forward deck. Unlike the defensive missiles that shoot up into the sky, the Tomahawks pitch over immediately after launch. Each one carries a devastating 1,000-pound high-explosive warhead. Each one has a range of over 1,000 miles, and each one knows its destination with terrifying pinpoint accuracy. The targets are not random acts of vengeance, they are surgical, calculated, and totally uncompromising. The targets are the exact Iranian coastal missile batteries that launched the attack. How did the U.S. know where they were? The Aegis system is so advanced that while it was shooting down the incoming missiles, it was simultaneously tracking their exact flight paths backward, reverse calculating their ballistic trajectories to pinpoint the exact GPS coordinates of the mobile launchers on the Iranian coast. The 12 Tomahawks fly low, engaging in terrain-following flight. They skim just 50 feet above the dark waters of the Gulf, using the terrain to mask their approach from Iranian early warning radars. They are subsonic, giving them time to cross the distance, but they are effectively invisible until it is far too late to stop them. Flight time exactly 11 minutes. On the Iranian coast, the IRGC missile crews are likely celebrating, assuming they have just overwhelmed an American warship. 11 minutes later, their entire reality ceases to exist. The Tomahawks find their marks. The coastal batteries are not merely damaged or disabled, they are categorically erased from the face of the Earth. 12 separate launch sites, 12 massive, earth-shattering direct hits. The secondary explosions from the remaining Iranian munitions light up the mountainous coastline, and just like that, with ruthless automated efficiency, Iran's offensive anti-ship capability along that entire critical stretch of the strait is completely annihilated. But the United States government did not stop there, because dropping bombs is only half of the equation. The other half is the psychological warfare of deterrence. This wasn't just about destroying a few missile launchers. It was about sending an unmistakable, chilling message to every single adversary watching the satellite feeds in Moscow, Beijing, and Pyongyang. 30 minutes after the Tomahawk strikes conclude, a massive blip on the global radar begins to shift. 200 miles south in the Arabian Sea, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group receives new orders. The massive nuclear-powered supercarrier, displacing 100,000 tons of steel and diplomacy, changes its heading. It begins moving north directly toward the Strait of Hormuz. And it is not traveling alone. A carrier strike group is a floating armada. Accompanying the Eisenhower are two more Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser packed with even more firepower, and lurking silently beneath the waves, a Los Angeles-class nuclear fast-attack submarine. On the deck of the carrier itself sits the ultimate projection of American power, an air wing of 64 aircraft. Squadrons of FA-18 Super Hornets load up with live air-to-air and air-to-ground ordnance. EA-18G Growlers prepare to jam every radar frequency in the Middle East. E-2D advanced Hawkeyes take to the skies to provide a god's-eye view of the entire battle space. This movement is not a routine patrol. This is the naval equivalent of putting a loaded gun on the table. It is a blockade in reverse. The United States just moved a fully armed carrier strike group directly into the claustrophobic throat of the strait, effectively daring the Iranian military to do something about it. And here is the most brilliant, frustrating part for America's adversaries. They executed this massive deployment entirely under the legal framework of Freedom of Navigation Operations, or FONOPS. Under established international maritime law, the United States Navy has every legal right to transit those waters. Iran cannot officially claim a territorial violation at the United Nations. They cannot legally escalate the situation without looking like the aggressor. The United States just parked its biggest stick in their front yard, and the law says it is allowed to be there. But geopolitics is rarely dictated by the pure letter of the law. Here is the terrifying problem. Legality doesn't matter when national pride, regime survival, and domestic politics are on the line. The Iranian leadership is now backed into a vicious corner. They face an impossible binary choice. They can back down, release the tanker, and look incredibly weak in front of their citizens and their proxy forces across the entire region. Or they can double down, escalate the violence, and risk a full-scale conventional war with the United States. A war they know they absolutely cannot win in a direct fight. And that is exactly where the situation becomes incredibly dangerous. Because in modern asymmetric warfare, Iran doesn't actually have to win a conventional naval battle to succeed. They just have to make the conflict so incredibly bloody, chaotic, and economically costly that the United States public and political leadership reconsiders the engagement. And Iran has spent decades building the exact tools required to do that. If they want to escalate, they will activate their vast network of proxy militias. Heavily armed groups in Iraq and Syria will begin raining rockets on remote American bases. Hezbollah in Lebanon could open a new front. The Houthis in Yemen will escalate their attacks on Red Sea shipping. Furthermore, Iran possesses sophisticated cyber warfare capabilities. They have hit American financial institutions and critical infrastructure before. They will try to do it again, aiming to cause blackouts or financial chaos on the U.S. homeland. But most importantly, they still retain the ability to turn the Strait of Hormuz into a maritime graveyard. Even without their coastal batteries, they can deploy thousands of cheap, difficult-to-detect naval mines into the shipping lanes. They can use massive, decentralized swarms of hundreds of small boats packed with explosives to overwhelm the defenses of commercial ships. They have invested heavily in anti-access/area denial strategies that simply do not require a massive, expensive blue water navy to execute. The Pentagon strategists know exactly how dangerous this asymmetric threat is, which is exactly why the next move the US made wasn't kinetic. It was deeply, quietly diplomatic. Within hours of the Tomahawk strikes, the backdoor communications channels were ripped wide open. The United States and Iran do not have formal diplomatic relations, so these messages are not passed in embassies. They are passed through quiet intermediaries. Diplomats in Oman, negotiators in Qatar, and even back-channel contacts in Russia played a frantic role in passing messages in the dark. The message delivered to Tehran from Washington was reportedly brutal, simple, and stripped of all diplomatic courtesy. It essentially read, "Stand down immediately or we will systematically dismantle every single piece of your coastal defense network. We will sink your navy at its moorings and we will enforce a complete, uncontested no-fly zone over the entire Persian Gulf. You will lose your military deterrence, you will lose your geopolitical leverage, and most importantly, you will lose it publicly on the world stage." Faced with the absolute certainty of overwhelming, unstoppable force, Iran blinked. 72 tense hours after the initial boarding of the Panamanian tanker, the vessel was abruptly released. The civilian crew was unharmed. State television in Iran quickly spun the narrative, broadcasting a brief statement calling the entire incident a minor navigation misunderstanding. They completely ignored the massive exchange of firepower. There was absolutely no mention on Iranian domestic media of the 18 missiles they fired, and there was certainly no mention of the 12 American Tomahawks that turned their military bases to ash. For the public, it was just a quiet, sudden return to the status quo. But if you look closely at the waters of the Gulf, you will see exactly what didn't go back to normal. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group didn't turn around. It stayed. As of this moment, it is still there, patrolling the narrow waters of the strait in a highly visible, incredibly aggressive pattern that makes one thing abundantly clear to everyone in the region: this is no longer a temporary response. This is a permanent, heavily armed presence until further notice. United States Central Command has publicly announced a dramatically increased operational tempo for all naval and air assets in the Middle East region. In military translation, that means more destroyers in the water, more combat air patrols in the sky, and infinitely more firepower ready to be unleashed at a moment's notice. Behind the heavily guarded doors of the intelligence community, the NSA and the CIA are now tracking every single movement of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps in real time, using satellite surveillance, signals intelligence, and cyber infiltration to ensure they are never surprised again. This exchange was not just a brief tactical victory for the United States Navy, it was a massive global strategic recalibration, because the United States just proved with explosive finality something that every single adversary on the planet needed to see. The message is clear: you cannot close the Strait of Hormuz, you cannot hold the global economy hostage, not while the United States Navy is watching. And not while the American military possesses the capability and the political will to strike back faster, harder, and more accurately than you can even reload your weapons. But as the smoke clears over the Persian Gulf, there is a much larger, far more terrifying question that very few people are asking. What happens when the next massive provocation doesn't come from Iran? What happens when the leadership in China, watching these exact events unfold on satellite imagery, decides to test this exact same American resolve in the heavily contested waters of the Taiwan Strait? What happens if Russia decides to press its luck and threaten commercial shipping in the Bosphorus or the Black Sea? Because the violent precedent that was just set in the Middle East is not just a regional policy, it is a global doctrine. The United States just demonstrated to the world that it is entirely willing to use overwhelming lethal military force to protect global economic choke points, and that single undeniable fact fundamentally changes the strategic calculus for every rival superpower on Earth. Some military analysts in Washington are already calling this the birth of a new Cold War maritime doctrine, a return to the aggressive, deterrence-heavy posturing of the 20th century. Other, more pessimistic voices in the intelligence community say this is not a deterrent at all. It is simply the opening salvo of a much hotter, far more devastating global conflict. Either way, one thing is absolutely certain. The world just got significantly more volatile, and the margin for error just shrank to zero. The United States has made it undeniably clear that it is willing to go right to the very edge of the abyss to maintain control of the world's oceans. So, as we look at the carrier strike groups patrolling the narrow waters, here is the real question we have to ask ourselves. Was this incredibly violent display of force a masterful success in deterrence that just saved the global economy? Or was it the very spark that is going to ignite a fire we cannot put out? Drop your take in the comments below. And if you want more deep dive, uncompromising breakdowns on the military strategy and geopolitical realities driving what is really happening behind the mainstream headlines, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because as the situation in the Strait proves, this story is far, far from over.